Borderlands 4, subtitle, They Can Still Make a Good One. Don't get me wrong, Borderlands 4 is a game with flaws that are completely new to the series for the most part, but it's also one of the most efficient course corrections I've ever seen. The direction the franchise had been heading towards greater and greater absurdity was becoming unsustainable. So Borderlands 4 reels it all back into something much more approachable and, in my opinion, something much more interesting. You can't say it offers something completely new or an entirely fresh take on the series, but what it does do is cut the chaff, recenter the storytelling efforts, and reset everything to a much more workable foundation, all while staying completely faithful to the lore and characters that had come before. It is, in my opinion, exactly the shot in the arm that the franchise needs. Borderlands 4 is my favourite kind of game, a game that was made specifically just for me. The game addresses and undoes pretty much all of my criticisms of the past few games, while quadrupling down on the references to my favourite game in the series, all while doing a bunch of stuff that I honestly thought the franchise had forgotten how to do. It's not my favourite game in the series, but depending on how all the DLC pans out, I think it could be. It's one of the most cohesive games in the series, where everything feels extremely well planned out and developed. But only time will tell if that's actually true, or if that's just a clever impression. According to narrative director Sam Winkler, there was a mandate on Borderlands 3 that there had to be a joke every second. Probably a slight exaggeration, but that is absolutely the impression that the game leaves. Borderlands 4 still has jokes, but it also gives the story time to breathe, which gives it the kind of way that the franchise hasn't really managed in a decade. And while we're being all positive and will most likely continue to do so, I just want to give a quick little, Randy, shut the fuck up. You're embarrassing yourself and your entire company, so please, just log off of Twitter and let the game speak for itself. Or better yet, let me speak for you, Randy. You just sit back and practice your wee magic tricks or whatever it is that you do. Anyway, settle down, kiddos, it's story time.
So, you want to hear a story, huh? Yeah, old Marcus still has a few tales to tell. And this is the start of something new. A spark that just might leave the galaxies themselves ablaze.
The biggest, most important, and most impactful change that Borderlands 4 makes is a change in scale. Borderlands 3 was a planet-hopping adventure taking the series off of Pandora and into the wider galaxy. Borderlands 4 brings it back down again, focusing the entire story on a single planet, Kairos. This is a pretty bold de-escalation for a sequel to make, but it's also a choice with a lot of key creative advantages, because that singular focus is what allows Kairos to be one of the most fleshed out locations in the series, aside from Pandora. Borderlands 4 has a commitment to world building that hasn't really been a priority since Borderlands 1. Everything in Borderlands 4 is driven by cause and effect, starting long before the Vault Hunter ever arrived on Kairos. For 1,000 years, the Timekeeper has ruled over the planet with an iron fist, hidden from the rest of the galaxy by a barrier that lets no one see in and no one see out. He controls the population not just with force, but with bolts planted into the back of everyone's necks, which allow him to see through their eyes and assume full control of their bodies if needs be. So it was until the Moonfall. When Lilith teleported Elpis away at the end of Borderlands 3, it ended up here, shattering the Timekeeper's barrier and exposing Kairos to the greater universe. That was 6 years ago, and now the Vault Hunters have arrived, as they always do, in search of fame, fortune, and glory. The Timekeeper can't stop people from coming, but he won't ever let you leave. As is tradition, the game really begins with a song, and this is a good one. This Land by Des Rocks. Like Borderlands 3's intro, it's a song that was written for the game. However, unlike Borderlands 3, it's a song about something. It's about chaos, it's about rebellion, it's about breaking free. Many a Borderlands game has shown that where Vault Hunters go, chaos follows, and chaos is something that the Timekeeper and his perfect order just can't allow. So the crew are captured within minutes of their arrival and bolted just like everyone else. Whichever character you pick is the first one on the list. Everything from the intro to the end of the prologue is incredibly efficient storytelling. It introduces both of the major enemy factions of the game, the Order and the Rippers. It introduces each of the player characters and then your chosen character and their conversations during the escape. And it properly introduces the Timekeeper and his capabilities, with how he has all the other prisoners kill each other as a demonstration for you. Then with how he has your rescuer, RJ, stab himself in the chest after he sacrifices the means of blocking the Timekeeper's control to you. The Timekeeper is a much more hands-off villain than a lot of previous villains in the series, but his shadow looms large over the whole game, and it's these introductory moments that really make that work. Once you wash up on the beach and are woken up by Claptrap, the rest of the game unfolds before you. Rather than being a series of instanced areas like all the previous games, Borderlands 4 is a full open world, all taking place on a single gigantic map. This is a bigger change than it sounds, and it comes with both advantages and disadvantages, but to ease you into it, the game limits you to a single region for the first few hours. The Fadelands are a great place to start because they couldn't be more different from Pandora. It's a series of rolling green hills and farms, Kairos' own heartlands, where all of the food for the big city is produced. This environment isn't completely new to the series, but it was previously only the domain of Wonderlands. Sci-fi farmland is something new and something interesting, and having a thought-out food source for the big city is just the first of so many details that make Kairos feel like a real and grounded setting. Kairos, as you explore it, is sort of post-apocalyptic, but not all the way. Since the Moonfall, the Timekeeper has had the city and each region surrounding the city on lockdown, leaving the outer regions to mostly fend for themselves. Each region has both a friendly faction to help and a region subcommander to fight. The Fadelands are home to the simplest of both, which is fine because it's the introductory region before things get more complicated. The player characters were not the only ones to crash on Kairos. Anyone who gets close to the planet is shot down and dragged to the planet's surface. So the Outbounders have the simplest goal of all the factions. They just want to leave. As a group that would exist, they make perfect sense, but that goal is broad, so the faction is given flavour by their leader, a guy called Rush. Rush is the first of many examples of how much better written Borderlands 4 is compared to the last few entries in the series. Borderlands 3 especially had a very hard time writing NPCs that were funny, likeable, and interesting all at the same time. It could do funny and likeable, or funny and interesting, or sometimes even likeable and interesting, but it couldn't ever manage to do all three. Rush ticks all three, and he does it casually. He's just a nice guy. He's friendly, he's helpful, he's optimistic without being completely naive. He is exactly the kind of guy you'd want in charge if you were stuck on Kairos. A leader who truly cares about and serves the people under him, a total contrast to the Timekeeper in every way. He has quirks, like his love of baking or his gullibility for scams, but the quirks did not become the whole of him like they so often did in Borderlands 3. They're just quirks like you'd expect any person to have. It's not realism, but it is a much more grounded approach to character writing than even Borderlands 2 was aiming for. One of the more subtle changes that Borderlands 4 makes is just the idea that a person like Rush could exist at all. The games have always been too cynical to imagine that someone as genuine and altruistic as Rush could exist without some kind of caveat or punishment for their good deeds. But over and over again, Borderlands 4 pivots towards optimism and hope and genuine kindness, instead of cynicism and nihilism. It turns out that there is rest for the wicked after all. Of course, you still play as a mass murderer, but there is an undercurrent of heroism to your actions in Borderlands 4 that the new cast of player characters have been designed to embody. Character design continues to be one of the franchise's strongest aspects, and Borderlands 4 does not disappoint. All 4 Vault Hunters are exceptionally well designed in their looks, their abilities, and their personalities. My favourite is Harlow, the Gravatar, because like Rush, she's just a genuinely nice person. She's friendly, she wants to help, and she's happy to be here, which honestly does make her stand out amongst most player characters in the series. She has big G. Willikers energy, but she's also a scientist, one of many super geniuses across the series who was apparently responsible for most of Maliwan's advanced technologies. Something which he is trying to atone for, as all 4 of the Vault Hunters are atoning for something, explored in each of their respective animated shorts released in the lead up to the game's launch. In combat, she fights with various gadgets that you can adapt and upgrade on the quite frankly ridiculously expansive skill trees. Each character has 3 skill trees which could on their own be the entire skill tree for a character in one of the previous games, branching the character in wildly different directions depending on personal playstyle. Having played through the game as both Harlow and Vex, there's entire pages of skills that I haven't even looked at because I found the abilities I liked and stuck with them for the whole game. Vex, for example, has the ability to summon shades of herself that run around the battlefield causing havoc, or the ability to enter a kind of Super Saiyan mode where you can run around shooting eldritch blasts at people. Or, the one I ended up sticking with, a giant ghost cat that serves as a permanent companion like Flax Pets in Borderlands 3. Each has completely different rhythms of play made even more different with the various skills and modifiers you unlock as you progress down the trees. This character-focused gameplay is something I've really come to appreciate about the series, even when common wisdom would be to allow players to make their own characters. Because when Wonderlands did that, some of the magic was lost. Vex's character, her personality, and the way she fights are all intricately tied together. She's a fucking witch. That's how she looks, that's how she acts, that's how she fights, all in perfect unison. Gameplay overall is not too different to Borderlands 3 because Borderlands 3's gunplay was already so close to perfect. Instead, it's these systems surrounding the gunplay that make Borderlands 4 distinct. The flavour that each Vault Hunter provides, along with the new gun generation system, which is, in my opinion, absolutely excellent. Guns in Borderlands 4 are based around a part system, where all of the manufacturers of the previous games, plus a few new ones, have different parts that can be slotted into a gun to increase its weirdness and its capabilities. So you can have a Vladov assault rifle that shoots Torgue sticky grenades and is thrown to reload like a TDR gun. The rarity of a gun impacts how many different parts it has, so as you get further into the game, the guns you find get more unique and more powerful, creating one of the most satisfying loot loops in the series. On top of the guns, a couple new things have been added into your gear, like a permanent healing item that you can use on a cooldown, and Ordnance, which is a combination of grenades and heavy weapons that acts like a secondary action skill to work alongside the rest of your build. I think this is a much better way to do it. Heavy weapons in all of the previous games have always felt mostly redundant because ammo was expensive and rare, and they didn't really do enough damage to justify sacrificing one of your inventory slots for them. Treating them instead as another ability takes away that hoarding ammo for the big boss impulse that often haunts heavy weapons in games. The game brings back the advanced mobility of the pre-sequel, with double jumping and gliding made part of the default moveset, and in general, the combat is also balanced to be much less bullet spongy than the previous few games. And outside of a few weird exceptions, which might be bugs, I'm not sure, the world always scales to your level. The only real downgrade is the UI, which is honestly worse than Borderlands 3. I didn't know that was possible, but here we are. Removing the minimap doesn't bother me that much because it wouldn't really fit with the new approach to level design. But the actual menus are just atrocious. It's very clear it was designed for a mouse with no consideration for controller support, one of my biggest pet peeves in menu design. But it's also just really small and dark and hard to read. I will never understand how we had a pretty much perfect menu system in Borderlands 2 and then just keep downgrading from there. But I can deal with a crappy UI, I've gotten very used to it at this point. Especially when Borderlands 4 finally fixes one of my biggest issues across the entire series. Your player character actually appears in cutscenes! I know it sounds like a silly thing to make a big deal over, but I cannot oversell just how excited I was when a cutscene started and I was in it. It's a huge improvement to the storytelling of the whole game, especially combined with the return of custom responses from the pre-sequel. Characters will actually use your name sometimes, but more often than not, these custom moments are just used for banter and little moments of characterization. Like recovering some of Rush's books, where each character has different opinions on books and Rush will respond in kind. Like how Harlow, as a fellow book lover, is interested in what he's been reading.
I thought I saw some books when we met. What sort of stuff do you like?
Oh, a bit of everything. Fantasy, historical fiction, romance. And then horror if I don't feel like sleeping the next 3 nights.
Or how Amon views stealing books as one of the worst crimes of fascism.
They hope taking away knowledge will make people easier to control.
And that's why I'll keep collecting as many books as I could get my hands on.
Rather than being a weird ghost who drifts in and out of existence when the plot demands it, the protagonist of Borderlands 4 is a part of the world, a genuine actor in the plot that is just as important as everyone else. That's how most games work, but I'm very glad that Borderlands is now finally up to code. Rush isn't just an ally, he's a friend. You can feel that in the writing because the player character is allowed to be a part of the world, not just an observer of it. Rush's arc across the story is that he learns to be more like you, to stop being so passive and to start taking an active role in the fight against the Order, to eventually lead the final charge himself right alongside you. In parallel to Rush, the commander of the Fadeland is also a great introductory antagonist. Idolater Saul is a massive hulking baby man who wants nothing more than to be the Timekeeper's #1 guy. He is the ultimate suck-up. He's not very smart, he's not very threatening, but he is very strong and he is dangerously loyal. He's a true believer in the Timekeeper's perfect order and views any talk of freedom or any dissent as weakness and lack of vision. Can they not see that the Timekeeper offers perfection, that a place within his order is the most meaningful way anyone could live? The irony being that Saul himself is currently out of the Timekeeper's good graces, exiled from the city and desperately trying to get back to his master's side again, desperate to please. While the Timekeeper mostly takes a back seat, only chiming in with his thoughts occasionally, each of the sub-commanders still ultimately serve to build up the Timekeeper by being a part of the system and a part of the Timekeeper's world. Saul is the ultimate example of servitude, the ultimate sycophant. Through him, the culture of the Order and all these dudes you spend the whole game fighting becomes clear. Kairos being cut off from the rest of the galaxy means it can have a culture separate from the mega corporations that dominate the rest of the universe. The Order has an aesthetic totally different from anything seen before, sleek and white and gold, but also distinctly weird. A lot of the Order's forces are made up of these strange synthetic creatures that are a mix of cybernetic and biological construction, similar to the Iridian Guardians of the previous games, but much more rudimentary and factory-made. The Timekeeper is a pretty standard despot. Do everything I say or I'll kill you. So why would anybody willingly serve him, aside from the fact that he can physically force people to serve him via the bolts? It's because power attracts the weak. The Timekeeper is an immortal being with godlike power, and Idolater Saul idolizes him. He models himself to be exactly what he thinks the Timekeeper wants, because he has no real desires of his own, no real purpose. Willingly giving yourself up to authoritarianism seems insanely counterintuitive to most people, because it is. Saul's unyielding love for the Timekeeper is not reciprocated. He discarded Saul without a second thought and ultimately lets you kill him because if you can kill him, then he's no longer useful anyway. Not that you should feel bad for Saul. He idolizes a fascist because he himself is a fascist, a cruel little worm who enjoys inflicting cruelty upon others. Like any authoritarian regime, the Timekeeper's order is a hierarchy, and the higher up the ladder you are, the more freedom you have to exert your power and will over others. Saul literally turns people into weaponized goo, including his own underlings, because if they're beneath him on the hierarchy, then their life simply matters less than his, and they can serve him better as gooey bio-armor. The duty of the weak is to nourish the strong. In reality, he is ugly and far from perfect, but he coats himself in the mushed up blood of his lessers to emulate the Timekeeper's perfection. This is the exact kind of deeply political satire that's been absent from the series for the last decade. It's not a satire of corporate capitalism like previous games, but it is a satire of fascism. Saul is just the most exaggerated extreme version of your typical MAGA chud, a supersized JD Vance, an embarrassing idiot who you have to take seriously anyway because they have a ridiculous amount of power. In order to help fight against Saul, the Outbounders send you to find an Order defector hiding in the forest, a scientist named Zadra. And she explains that the 3 sub-commanders each have a special command bolt, which once you've gathered all 3 will allow you to face the Timekeeper in his vault. Once she gives you that goal and unlocks the other regions for you, you can progress the story in whatever order you want, although narratively it's most satisfying to tackle each region one at a time. To the northeast of Dominion, the Timekeeper's capital city, is the Terminus mountain range, home of the Augurs. A faction of mountain-dwelling cyborgs with by far the most interesting culture of all the factions in the game. Most of the Timekeeper's war machine runs on a substance very creatively named Ordinite, which is mined in the Terminus range by the Augurs. In exchange for their cooperation in this process, the Timekeeper offers the Augurs a much greater deal of autonomy than the rest of Kairos, and as such their culture has been allowed to spread and flourish across the region. The Augurs blend different aspects of Inuit, Nepalese, and other mountainous peoples with sci-fi elements to create an extremely distinct culture and aesthetic. They have shrines dotted around the mountain, various customs and traditions that you're invited to take part in. They have naming conventions where your personality comes to define you, like the faction leader of the Augurs, Defiant Calder. He's not technically the leader of the Augurs. The Augurs are led by a council, where the head of each clave, clans that perform different roles in Augur society, meet to determine the actions of the whole. Calder is the head of the mining clave, one of the most important to the Augurs. They're a deeply spiritual people, viewing the mountain itself as a kind of deity. but they're also highly tech-savvy. Every single augur has at least one cybernetic enhancement. In fact, for some, like Calder himself, they are mostly cybernetics. One of his arms, both of his legs, and one of his eyes all replaced with robotics. Calder is an excellent window into augur culture because while he follows and respects all of their practices and beliefs, he's not overly zealous about it. He's very chatty and down to earth, happy to explain things to a newbie like you, and very understanding of the fact that to an outsider, these things might seem a bit strange. Calder is defiant because he spoke out against the Timekeeper. The autonomy he granted to the augurs has been waning over time, and the sub-commander of the range, a former augur called Vale Lictor, has been encroaching on their rights even further. The rest of the council feared backlash too much, so they exiled Calder and his clave for his defiant talk. This is all long before the player ever shows up on Kairos, and this is exactly why Borderlands 4's world building is so impressive. The augurs have a well-determined culture, a well-determined place within the wider structure of Kairos, and a conflict that has arisen naturally as a result of these things. One of the most interesting insights into augur culture is a little quest Calder gives you after the main quest in the region is over, to go and retrieve the bolts of some of his dead clave and return them to a memorial in town. Bolts are the ultimate symbol of the Timekeeper's authoritarian control, but they've also been a part of this culture for centuries and as such have taken on deeper meaning. Everyone has them, so they are a symbol of the person, regardless of anything else the bolts represent. This is the kind of world building that makes Borderlands 4 not just good for Borderlands, but good for sci-fi in general. Extremely well thought out and interesting to discover. This theoretically goes hand in hand with the open world. Borderlands 4's seamless open world offers a much more natural environment than the curated locations of the previous games. You can drive from one side of the map to the other, passing various small towns, order bases, and Ripper encampments, all blending together seamlessly. The upside of this approach is that Kairos feels like a much more real setting than any other places in the series. This wider approach allows for the small details, like the farms of the Fadelands or the mines and scattered equipment of the range, to be given the focus that the more limited areas of the previous games didn't bother with. The downside is that the game's regions aren't quite as distinct as the individual zone approach, because everything has to blend together naturally. One side of the Fadelands looks much the same as the other side of the Fadelands. Of course, Borderlands 4 is still a video game, so the open world is filled to the brim with stuff, a lot of which can start to feel a little repetitive and redundant. Often the fun of an open world activity is directly tied with how much time it takes you to complete the activity. At the top of the list are safe houses. These are areas that you can quickly clear of enemies to unlock a new fast travel location with vending machines and bounty boards and all the rest. A perfectly standard open world activity, and often these safe houses are in artistically interesting locations, especially the ones in the Terminus range because they're all old augur buildings like temples. Then there are the boss gauntlets. Across the world are a series of order bunkers, abandoned augur mines, and Ripper drill sites, all of which are going to be a series of combat arenas ending in a unique boss fight with either the Order, the Rippers, or a big animal, depending on what type of gauntlet it is. These are slightly lower on the fun scale because they're all quite samey and don't offer much in the way of lore or visuals, but they do at least offer an interesting boss fight at the end. All of these major open world activities also offer SDU points, which is the currency you use to upgrade your ammo capacity. So even outside of loot and XP, there is a good incentive to do these things when you find them. At the bottom of the fun hierarchy are the generic open world activities you could find in pretty much any open world game ever, like hacking into radio towers while fighting off hordes of enemies. Or the absolute worst of all of them, these things which you need to pick up and run back to a safe house to receive a paltry pile of loot. Borderlands 4 scraps the capture rides of the old games in favour of a Digi-Runner which you can summon at any time like the Sparrows in Destiny. But you cannot carry things and drive at the same time, so you have to walk back to the safe house while carrying the things. You also can't climb or use the grappling hook, two new mechanics the game adds, because if you do either while holding a thing, you will drop the thing. So if you do need to climb, you have to drop the thing, climb up, and then use the grappling hook to grab the thing again before it despawns. It's extremely tedious and boring, the very definition of time waster content. It is completely optional, you don't have to do it, but it is a shame that a world so well thought out often disappoints when it comes to the physical exploration of that space a lot of the time. Augur culture is fascinating, but mechanically, it really means nothing more than a special kind of loot chest. Side quests end up exploring the world much more than these free-form open-world activities. It's not too big of a deal since the majority of them are just some contextual reasons to get into gunfights, which is the core of the game, but it's probably the main aspect where the game disappoints. The impulse towards a full open world was a good one, but it's clear they hadn't fully figured out what to do with it. I can forgive it because the plot and story really is just that good. Vile Lictor is the most threatening of the three sub-villains. Where Saul is a stand-in for the party official, the true believer, Lictor is much more of a Josef Mengele type, a mad scientist who uses fascism as a shield to conduct horrific experiments in the pursuit of power. Not for any greater good or even to help the Order, Lictor is a full-on competitor to the Timekeeper. He wishes to transcend his humanity and become a god, the ultimate superior life form. His boss fight reflects this, a writhing mass of hands and technology. He's essentially made himself into a vault monster, one of the ancient eldritch gods like the Destroyer. What makes this work is that he's a former augur, and using technology to enhance themselves is something that all of the augurs do. Lictor just takes it way to the extreme to disastrous results, not enhancing his humanity, but replacing it. Lictor is the most recent addition to the Timekeeper's hierarchy, only joining after the Moonfall. Lictor was just a regular scientist, but then he saw a moon appear in the sky out of nowhere, breaking the Timekeeper's barrier in an instant. Clearly there was some sort of power that could make such a thing possible, and he would figure it out. The Timekeeper allowed this research to progress even knowing Lictor's ambition. He recognised that ambition and thirst for knowledge as a useful asset, even if he knew he would have to put him down eventually. This is where the game starts directly weaving in the story threads of the previous game. After all, if Elpis is here, that means Lilith is here too. Far out in the mountains is the crashed wreckage of Sanctuary 3, the ship that served as your home in Borderlands 3. Some of the Crimson Raiders found Elpis a few years ago, but ended up stranded on the planet like everyone else, unable to call for help. That's why Claptrap was there on the beach to wake you up, but there are a few other familiar faces dotting the planet. Not too many, just the folks who happened to be on the ship when it crashed. One of them is still here, hiding out in the wreckage. Amara, still on the hunt for Lilith while trying to avoid the Timekeeper's watchful eye. Borderlands 4 has a much better approach to these returning characters than Borderlands 3 did. There are much less returning characters, but because of that, each of the characters who do show up are given much more focus. And Amara makes a great NPC for all the same reasons she was so fun to play in Borderlands 3. Lictor is linked to Amara's search for Lilith because he's searching for something similar, researching how exactly sirens get their powers in the first place, from a dimension called the Phase. Sirens can draw from the Phase naturally, but Lictor starts doing it unnaturally, ripping holes into the Phase to tap into its power directly, and to create these rather annoying vile enemy variants covered in evil crystals. Lictor mentions a test subject of his, and both Amara and the player character assume it's Lilith. It's not, which is a twist for later, but it's still a very fun way that the threads of the previous game and the threads of this one are intricately tied together. The one caveat is Amara's place in the story. It was recently found in the code of the game that originally Amara's role was going to be filled by Ava, the much maligned teenage prodigy of Borderlands 3. And my response when that news broke was, duh. Because this search for Lilith is exactly what was set up for Ava at the end of the Director's Cut DLC. Amara even has Ava's pet with her and constantly uses powers that are very similar to Ava's powers. I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, I vastly prefer Amara as a character and she does well with the spotlight she's given. On the other hand, Ava would make much more sense with what the third game tried to set up. And with Borderlands 4's better writing, they probably could have redeemed Ava and figured out how to make her character actually work. Because it feels less like a creative choice, we want to do Amara, and more like a marketing choice, we don't want to do Ava. Ava is still the face of everything wrong with Borderlands 3 in ways which I think are unfair, but that's the reputation. Seeing Ava pop up in the trailer certainly wouldn't get everyone as excited as seeing Amara. There is plenty in the story that does feel tailored for Amara. They didn't half-ass this change. Just before the final boss fight, Lictor manages to cut off one of Amara's arms in a surprise attack, which feels like a consequence and a challenge specific to Amara, who's incredibly prideful about her strength and her abilities. She's now forced to adapt to a new arm and a sense of powerlessness. The same thing might have been done with Ava, but it fits Amara better. Dwelling on what could have been instead of what is a trap that I try and avoid. But this is a very interesting shift, and it makes me wonder what exactly they plan to do with Ava, if anything, in the future. The third region of the world to the northwest of Dominion is Carcadia Burn, formerly just Carcadia. This is the area that was hit the worst by the moonfall, torching and fracturing the region into a barren, jagged wasteland. In other words, it's pretty much the, hey, remember Pandora section of the map. But Carcadia is home to two factions. First, it's the home base of the Rippers, Borderlands 4's answer to the Bandits of the previous games. It's explained very early on that removing the Timekeeper's bolts is extremely dangerous and usually fatal. Even if you do survive, it'll result in permanent brain damage. The Rippers are the folks who do it anyway, either self-inflicted or against their will as seen in the opening of the game. This already positions them as more interesting than the Bandits of some of the previous games because in some sense they do have a coherent ideology. The Timekeeper is a tyrant and the bolts are absolutely horrific. Maybe a little permanent brain damage is worth the price of freedom. Having all of the enemies you fight be brain-damaged psychopaths maybe sounds like a bad look, but there's a late-game side quest where a friendly NPC gets ripped against her will and she doesn't turn into a bloodthirsty psycho, which infers that donning the mask is still a choice, one spurred on primarily by Callus, the Ripper Queen. She was once the Timekeeper's top commander, but when the moon came, she had a vision of a woman with wings of fire. Herself, she assumed. Her destiny was on Elpis, it was not under the Timekeeper's thumb. So she became the first Ripper and inspired many of her soldiers to join her. As the head of her own faction, she is a cut above the other two commanders and is treated accordingly. She hates the Timekeeper much more than she hates you, but that doesn't mean she's going to let you interfere with her plans. In a funny way, the Rippers are kind of a redo of the Children of the Vault. It's another queen inspiring cult-like devotion. Except, like I asked for in my Borderlands 3 critique, they actually do commit to the religious elements. The moon magically appeared in the sky one day. It's not unreasonable to assume that it might do other stuff. Maybe we should worship the moon. Callus is a queen and a prophet, selling the promise of freedom from Kairos once she's achieved her destined power. It's quite easy to see why some people would consider this a better prospect than eternal subjugation to the Timekeeper, especially since Callus is a much better leader. She preaches freedom, and she means it, in all the most bloody and violent ways possible, but the freedom to murder whoever you want is still freedom. The Rippers are contrasted in Carcadia by the Electi, who couldn't be more opposite from the Rippers if they tried, and they are deliberately trying. Before the Moonfall, Carcadia was the home away from home for all the rich and famous of Dominion, the Beverly Hills of Kairos. When the Moonfall happened, all of the rich folks who survived were stranded out there, and rather than waste time and resources trying to rescue them, the Timekeeper simply left them there to die. The Electi are a pack of spoiled rich brats with absolutely no common sense or survival skills, forced to try and survive anyway. It's such a great idea for a faction. They wouldn't have had a hope in hell of surviving if it wasn't for Levane. She's not technically their leader, she's just the person they all turn to after the burn because she's the person who rose to the occasion and took control. Levane is probably my favourite character in the whole game. Her design is absolutely S tier, one of the best designs in the whole franchise, but she has a great story and personality to go along with it. As implied by her look, she was a fashion designer before all this started, which meant she had years of experience dealing with the ridiculous demands of rich nepo babies, and thus has more sympathy for the common man than her fellow electee. She is every bit the lady she appears to be, a little snooty, calling everyone darling, but she's also extremely practical. She realised that the first thing that would have to go if everyone was going to survive this cataclysm was pride. Time to give up the caviar, time to get to work, and never be too big to ask for help. She's not that much more knowledgeable about survival than the rest of them. It's just the fact that she didn't immediately crumble and was at least trying to do things that got her the immediate loyalty of the electee. Desperate for someone who at least seemed like they knew what they were doing. Although it certainly helped that she was already one of them. It's been 6 years and most of the electee are still self-entitled jackasses, but they are at least still alive. Levane was able to whip them into shape just enough to keep the lights on and the water running. It's like trying to herd a pack of lazy cats, but she is committed, and she does have a few friends she can lean on when things need done. Moxie's newest bar is also out in Carcadia Burn, where Zane is working as her bouncer. Over the last few years, Zane and Levane have had a complicated on-again, off-again relationship that is currently off. And their conversations are just flatly some of the best conversations in the game, because Zane is still hilarious and he makes a great contrast to the electee by refusing to ever take any of them seriously, aside from Levane. He also runs the weapon vending machines on Kairos instead of Marcus, which I find absolutely delightful.
Fuck! You're taking all me money! Wait! Why am I buying your shite?
The electee and the Rippers are contrasting examples of what freedom looks like. The Ripper's freedom means changing who they used to be, literally ripping out a part of themselves, while the Electi strive for freedom without letting go of who they are and who they used to be. Neither path is really ideal. A mix of both is required if you truly want to survive and be free. There are some things in Electi culture that are best left in the past. Zane ends up stealing the show for a lot of the main quest content in Carcadia, which is fine because, like with Amara, the game takes the time to explore Zane and give him an interesting character arc. But also because Levine and the Electi still get the spotlight in a series of faction quests. All 3 of the friendly factions get a series of faction quests marked differently in the UI as something above their run-of-the-mill side quests. They're not essential, but they do add a lot to the characterization for each faction and fill in some of the gaps in the lore. Although there are plenty of regular side quests that do that as well. In fact, side quests across the game are very solid. Like the balance that Borderlands 2 set up, the side quests are where you'll typically find the weirdest and most obviously comedic stuff in the game. Like a village being besieged by rogue TDR guns that you have to capture with legally distinct Pokeballs. Or the absolutely wild return of Genevieve, Balix's murderous ex from Borderlands 3. But even the wildest quests still tend towards a grounded reality. There's noticeably less fourth wall breaking things in the game, and much less dated reference humour than there was in Borderlands 3. There's no Tommy Wiseau to be found on Kairos. Most of the side quests are about taking a weird situation and then treating it mostly seriously anyway, like a dud missile who just really wants to know if it can explode. And plenty of side quests aren't jokes at all, like the one I already mentioned where that lady gets ripped. There's a whole series of quests about this old couple before and after that happens, where you just really get to know them, and through them get to know the culture of Dominion City. This does present another problem though, a problem that has technically always been in the series, but has never been a real problem until now. The Borderlands games have always had a hierarchy of NPCs. There's the main NPCs with the unique designs and the introduction screens, and then there's lesser NPCs who usually share the same 1 or 2 faces between them. But it doesn't really matter because they usually only show up in a minor quest or 2. It doesn't matter that Private Jessup here is just the generic Randall because he only has 1 line of dialogue. Borderlands 4 and actually giving some thought to these side quests and making them more important to the world building falters a bit by continuing this hierarchy of NPCs. Ben and Sue are well thought out characters, fleshed out in a way that's on par with someone like Rush, but they just look like generic extras. And that problem spans the whole game, most damningly including the faction quests. The Electi faction quests are about a traitor amongst the Electi leadership. For a traitor to be interesting, each of the leaders has to be a fleshed out character with potential motivation to be a traitor. Which they are, but they're also all just generic extra models, even though they have defined personalities and an important role in the story. But the worst is Conway. Conway is the second in command of the Outbounders and their chief scout. They're of basically equal importance to Rush, not just in the faction quests, but in the main quests. Often, when the player character is calling the Outbounders for help, they call Rush and Conway. They have an extremely well-defined personality, the teasing sarcasm to Rush's earnestness, which is essential for rounding out the faction. Along with their chief engineer, Rhodes, the vibe of the Outbounders is that they're a pack of regular folks trying to help each other in a bad situation.
Perhaps I should detail my plan further. Don't worry, for your sake, I'll do so in layman's terms.
Why use this layman guy's words instead of your own?
Rush, I don't really know how to respond to that.
He thinks you're serious.
What was that?
Nothing. Please continue about this Mr. Layman and your obvious reverence for his terms.
Conway is a great character, so is Rhodes for that matter, but Conway is the emotional anchor of the whole plotline. And they just look like a generic NPC. They don't even get a portrait on the radio when they're talking. Conway deserves a proper character model. So does Sue. Instead, they both have the same face as leader Cassandra over in Carcadia, who also deserves a model. And obviously there's a logistical issue there, but in a franchise famous for its character design, the fact that some of the best characters in the game just don't have a design is really frustrating. I've had this exact same issue with the last few Assassin's Creed games. The more real and immersive you're trying to make a game world, the more distracting these stock models become. It's a signal to the player that these characters don't matter, when in reality that's not true at all. And I fully believe this is something that could be fixed with a patch. I care about that way more than adding a couple new legendaries or whatever. Hell, Conway has way more to do in the story than Moxie does, and Moxie still shows up rocking the best look she's had yet. It's cool that one of the major characters in the game is non-binary and it's not a big deal, but maybe make enough of a deal about it to give them their own face. That's all I'm saying. For the electee, it's more just a missed opportunity. Lavaine's design is incredible, and the rest of the electee are a huge disappointment by comparison. Another good example is Quint, the first electee you meet. Head of security, which was formerly just a brunch club but now actually does have to do security. He's a minor character, he doesn't need a big title card, but he's still a significant part of the story. He latches onto Zane as a sort of mentor. There's a good running gag that Zane never says his name properly, and then the game flips that into drama when Quint is captured by the Rippers and strapped into their ripping machine, all because of Zane's recklessness. Zane is obviously higher up the chain than Quint, but Quint is obviously higher up the chain than his generic face suggests. And it seems like there should be room for some kind of middle tier character as well. Of course, like with some of the duller open world activities, everything that Borderlands 4 does to disappoint me, it does another thing exclusively just to butter me up. Even after getting all of the command bolts, Dominion City is still in lockdown, meaning you still can't get to the Timekeeper. But Amara has the solution. She's finally figured out where Lilith is. She never made it to Kairos. She's still on Elpis, just trapped on the other side, trapped in the phase. Earlier, during the Carcadia plotline, Callus shoots a bunch of chains to Elpis, creating a massive space elevator for her and her followers, but you kill her before she gets a chance to use it. But the lift is still there, so you, Amara, and Zane take a trip up to the segment of the game that was made literally just for me and nobody else. There are a few scattered hints to the prequel before this. For example, there are no returning animals on Kairos. Except for Threshers, because the prequel established that Threshers are actually from Elpis and were introduced to Pandora as an invasive species. So here they are on Kairos too. It's a very niche callback, but it shows a very solid commitment to establish lore that they didn't have to do. But this return to Elpis is next level. It's extremely self-indulgent with the nostalgia in a way that I absolutely adore, especially since Borderlands 3 seemed to ignore the prequel as much as possible. The look of the area is the same, the sound effects for the oxygen bubbles are the same, all the old dull architecture is exactly as it was. They even bring back a few jump pads with the same sound effects, and all of the music is extremely reminiscent of the prequel. Amara and Zane end up flying around in a romp comf jet, one of the boss fights towards the end of the prequel. There's even some audio logs scattered around the area, like one from Moxie talking about her bar in Concordia, or one from Claptrap where he talks about some of the events of the game, and even one from Ruddy Bloody Pickle, all grown up and now a crime boss, I guess? I'm normally a very anti-nostalgia sort of person, but the Elpis sequence works because while it does call back and reincorporate all of this stuff, it's also a recontextualization. Elpis is falling apart, it's being ripped to shreds by Kairos' gravity. You can actually see it degrade over time as you play through the story, getting more and more destroyed, only being held together by that ancient Iridian core you explore back in the prequel. I'm really starting to regret this gag, but I can't stop now. It's also way past the midpoint of the game, so you can't really argue that the game is banking on nostalgia. This entire sequence was completely hidden from all the game's marketing. It feels like an actual artistic choice to engage with the nostalgia, not just a cheap marketing strategy. It's exciting to see Elpis again, but there's also a layer of extreme melancholy to it. This is clearly the last time we're ever going to see it, which is likely why they took the time to do it upright. The ecologues aren't just fun callbacks, they're like ghosts reaching from a dead past. Also, Moon's haunted. Callus isn't quite dead after all, and she tagged along on your trip as a decaying cyborg zombie, still obsessed with finding her destiny, her flaming wings. The fact that her visions were really of Lilith is an obvious twist, but still a good twist, one that plays with the player's sense of dramatic irony. Because as soon as she mentions her vision, you can figure it out, but it's clear that without that foreknowledge, there's no way she could have. As I think has been evident so far, Borderlands 4 is not relying on the previous games. Most of what it does well completely on its own terms. But here we are anyway, in the destroyed setting of the prequel, with two of the protagonists of Borderlands 3 hunting for one of the protagonists of Borderlands 1, while being hunted by one of the villains of Borderlands 4. Just a massive blender of stuff that is extremely enjoyable as a fan of the series since the beginning. Nostalgia can be done well, it can enhance the story being told, just as long as it isn't the only thing that's being told with the story. In fact, the through line of all of Borderlands 4 is about that exact thing. It's about the folly of nostalgia, of trying to hold on to something forever. Everything breaks eventually. You do rescue Lilith, but in the end it's not Lilith who gets you into Dominion, it's Callus. As a final fuck you to the Timekeeper, she sends a chunk of Elpis right into his front door, cracking the way into the city wide open. Dominion, though, is far from the shining perfect gold you may expect from the Timekeeper's whole deal. Dominion City is a dump, a dark, grey and miserable place full of garbage and graffiti, hardly a city of order and perfection. Zadra is shocked to see it in such disrepair. That's not something the Timekeeper would ever have allowed in all the time she's known him, which is a very long time. Zadra is another excellent character, a much more down-to-earth replacement for Tanis, but with a much more complex backstory. Zadra wasn't just any old Order scientist, she was the Order scientist. She invented the synthetic army, she invented most of their technology, and most critically, she invented the bolts. A lot of the relationship between Zadra and the Timekeeper is left more inferred than stated, but what she does say is that she was on the first ship that ever crashed on Kairos over 1,000 years ago. The Timekeeper took a liking to her and granted her immortality like him. Zadra was a full-on villain for a millennia, watching this entire civilization grow under the Timekeeper's rule, completely blind to the cruelty of it all until Elpis shattered the barrier and she saw the stars again. It's pretty evident right from the beginning that the Timekeeper isn't human. He appears human, acts human, but he is clearly much more than a man. It's technically a twist right at the end of the game, but it's a twist that once you understand allows the entire story to click into place. The Timekeeper is a Vault Guardian, much like the Sentinel back in the prequel, but much more sentient and much more autonomous than any Guardian seen in the series before. Aside from the Watcher, who also shows back up in this game, finally. Millennia ago, he was given the task to guard his vault on Kairos, a planet hidden from the galaxy even then. One of the collectibles out in the open world hints at Kairos' original purpose. Messages left by Nereid, the same siren who left all the lore drops back in Borderlands 3. For a time, she found herself stuck on Kairos, imprisoned with the Timekeeper as her warden, but she managed to escape. He's an ancient prison warden of the gods, who has long outlived his masters. When humans first arrived on Kairos, he couldn't let them leave. He was explicitly created not to allow anyone to leave, but he also didn't want to just kill them, because he met Zadra, a kindred spirit. Zadra was open-minded but antisocial, brilliant but lacking in purpose, and so he allowed humanity to grow on Kairos under his watchful supervision. There's an excellent audio log in Upper Dominion, the part of the city that actually is all white and gold and glamorous, the part for Zadra. She tells him about gardening, how nature can look chaotic, but the joy of gardening is managing the chaos into something orderly and beautiful. Never one to mince words, the Timekeeper extends the metaphor. Kairos is the garden, its people the plants, and if she fails to contain the chaos, then he will raze it to the ground and start again. It sounds harsh, and it is. The Timekeeper is unambiguously a monster who's enslaved this planet for 1,000 years. But he's also a much more complicated monster than someone like Saul, because Saul had a choice, and the Timekeeper did not. He possesses autonomy, but he does not possess true free will. He has only ever been doing what he was made to do. There are other vaults on Kairos, but they're different to the vaults of the previous games. They look different, they behave differently, and that's because they're not true vaults. They are vaults of the Timekeeper's own creation. Inside them is where the Watcher shows up to give their usual cryptic information, outside of an absolutely insane side quest about their talking cat. Inside the false vaults are false guardians, which is revealed at the end are lesser recreations of the Timekeeper himself. He was trying to replace himself, trying to escape his role, but he failed, so he hid the creations away and accepted his fate. This is how, even as a monster, Zadra could believe in him for so long. She believed that the Timekeeper was doing the best that he could do, because he was. She just remained willfully ignorant of the suffering it was causing up in the shiny paradise he built for her. It's why she's so surprised to see Dominion in complete disarray. For the Timekeeper to do something other than what he's always done should be impossible, and yet he is. Zadra can't understand, or maybe doesn't want to understand, because she's the reason for this entire civilization in the first place. And when she left, the Timekeeper stopped caring about the garden. Kairos was all for her, and now that she's turned against him, there's nothing left to do but watch it all burn. A question that hangs over the entire game is, why does the Timekeeper let you do anything? He can't control you because Echo 4, your trusty robo-companion, is able to block the signal, but Rush, Calder, and Levain, they're all bolted. He could put a stop to their rebellions at any time, but he doesn't. He just watches it happen, watches as his empire crumbles. The reason is pure curiosity. He wanted to see how far you would make it, how powerful chaos truly was. The scene where he kills Zadra, or rather the scene where you kill Zadra, is absolutely full of implied meaning. It's not sad exactly, you knew this would happen eventually, you knew it would happen in the first 5 minutes when he put a bullet into your neck, it was only a question of when. But Zadra's death is well earned by the story. Pointless character death was a huge problem with Borderlands 3, a problem that Borderlands 4 draws attention to, and then skirts away from in a cheeky way quite a few times. Rush almost sacrifices himself in a big explosion during the assault on Saul's fortress, but Zadra pulls him out at the last minute with a quick fast travel she set up just in case he did something stupid. In a fight with the mysterious test subject on the lift up to Kairos, he keeps targeting Amara over and over again, and there is tension that she might actually die, not because it would make sense for the story, but because you know that they're stupid enough to actually do it. But she doesn't die, your character saves her at the last second. So here, when the game finally delivers on a death, it feels earned, especially with all the history between the two characters in question. 1,000 years of friendship, with romantic undertones absolutely intended if never confirmed. She is his last connection to humanity. By severing her, he severs it all. He has embraced mayhem, because mayhem always wins, and that means one day he will be free. His role, his duty, is to maintain order, to hold back chaos forever. But that task is impossible, because he's a boss fight in a video game, which means eventually he has to lose. Every line of dialogue within the fight in its 2 phases is dripping with meaning, but none more so than his last words.
Everything breaks. Even cages.
The Timekeeper is an absolutely fascinating villain because of how completely inhuman he is, while still having an undercurrent of sympathy because of that very inhumanness. He is nothing more than his role. He is the Timekeeper. His role is to keep things the same, forever, for eternity. His task is impossible. He only made it possible for so long with extreme authoritarian control, because that is the only thing that can prevent change, and even then, it can't do so forever. There's a side quest way back in the Fadelands with our old friend Claptrap. The Order has stolen some of his stuff and he desperately wants it back. It's a little shot of nostalgia because his things are a framed photo of Moxie, the vocal unit of Veronica, the second Claptrap he helped build in Borderlands 3, now deceased, and an old-style Psycho mask from Pandora. Just junk really, but Claptrap is obsessing over it, trapped in the glory days. The moral of the quest is that he has to move on, so you send all that stuff out on a boat and give it a good old Viking funeral. Out with the old and in with the new. It's a sneaky little microcosm of the whole game. Fascism is often deeply rooted in this longing sense of nostalgia. Make America great again. A longing for this past time when everything was better and perfect, and if we could just make it that way again, everything would be worth it. It's a dangerous delusion because it's impossible. Everything breaks, everything changes. There is no going back and there is no ability to freeze things in place, because time marches ever onwards no matter what you do. Trying to fight against it will only bring misery to you and everyone around you. That's why, despite his cruelty, the Timekeeper is a tragic figure, ordered to fight an eternal battle which he could never win. But change doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be the end. By the end of Borderlands 4, Elpis is gone entirely. The core finally gives out. Its remnants scatter in a great purple ring around Kairos, shattering the barrier for good and letting the true night sky shine across the planet. The setting I loved from a game I loved is gone forever, but it's become something new, something beautiful. I didn't expect this from Borderlands 4, not in an era that is so absolutely drowning in nostalgia. I recently watched Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, a show that it's becoming increasingly obvious only exists to tickle the nostalgia centres of my brain and tell me how great things are in Star Trek, just like I remember them. It loves Spock and it loves Kirk, but it only loves them as symbols, unchanging and perfect. It wants them to be the same forever, dolls in a perfect little dollhouse. It doesn't want to do anything new and scary and, well, strange. Borderlands also loves nostalgia. It spends an hour completely embracing it, but it has a much more intricate understanding of how poisonous a force nostalgia can be. You can indulge in some nostalgia, but you can't stay there forever. So Borderlands will continue to change, it will continue to move forward, and I can't think of anything more promising than that. Strangely, that's not the end of the video, because we are not at the end of Borderlands 4 yet, and won't be for quite some time. There's a lot of indications of what that future might hold. Borderlands 4 is the first game I've ever played with a fully playable post-credit scene, but it requires a little setup. Back in Lichter's lab, after killing the man himself, his test subject reveals himself to you. Not Lilith, but RJ, your friendly rescuer from all the way back in the prologue. He takes a rather accusatory tone with you for forgetting about him, which is fair, because I had, and so I was genuinely shocked to see him again. But RJ is not quite himself anymore, and he is adamant that you do not rescue Lilith from the phase. That's why he tries to stop you on the lift, and tries to stop you from killing the Timekeeper, and finally, after the credits, tries to stop you from entering the Timekeeper's vault. Whatever Lilith did, or will do, will kill everyone, at least according to RJ. Inside the vault, you find what appears to be Lilith, and she hands you some strange device. It's all very cryptic. But on your way to defeat the Timekeeper, the real Lilith tells you about some of her own visions in the phase. War is coming. Maybe I'm a fool for believing the story again. I got burned on that cliffhanger a decade ago. I should know better. But this time, I feel like it is going to be true. I feel like war really is coming. After all, the Timekeeper must have had a master, someone who gave him his order. Before, in the prequel, that statement was an open question. This time, with all the setup Borderlands 4 establishes, it's a promise. Whether it's still to come in Borderlands 4 or it'll be in Borderlands 5, I don't know, but I look forward to finding out. I had forgotten that Borderlands could be this good. I mean, I played all the games a few months ago, they still hold up great. But I'd forgotten what it's like to go in fresh and be kind of blown away by what you discover. Is it a perfect game? No, it's rough around the edges, every game in the series is, that's part of their charm. But it's a game with some real bite, a game with some real depth, and a game that is still very fun to play. If only Randy would shut the fuck up. I opened my Pandora's Box video by proclaiming that for better or for worse, I'm a Borderlands fan. And that's still true, but I have to say, it feels a lot better when we're in the better portion of that statement. Let's hope it lasts.
A Vault Hunter is more than a warrior, more than a treasure seeker. A Vault Hunter is a force of nature. They live on the borderlands between order and mayhem. A Vault Hunter is the universe's way of righting the scales when they're tipped. Kairos would never be a prison again.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here, or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up, it would mean a lot to me. As well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell, hype the thing, tell the chatbot you love me, or whatever else the algorithm wants today. I've previously talked about all of the previous Borderlands games in this massive behemoth of a video that you can find up here, or for something a bit darker, I'm currently making my way through all of the Darksiders games, which you can find in this playlist down here.